My friends, there is a strange moment that happens before a person's life changes. It does not always look dramatic. There may be no sudden announcement, no unexpected celebration, no visible proof that anything has changed. From the outside, the person may look exactly the same room, same job, same bank account, same circumstances, same unanswered questions. And yet, something inside them has become different. They have stopped feeling like they are waiting. They have stopped carrying the emotional posture of someone who is hoping to become wealthy someday. They begin to feel, quietly and almost privately, that the life they desire belongs to them. Not because they have evidence, not because somebody promised them it would happen, not because the world suddenly became easier, but because their inner relationship with money, security, possibility, and themselves has changed. And this is the part most people miss. Before the outer world catches up with a new identity, the inner world often changes first. Neville Goddard spent much of his teaching pointing toward this invisible territory. He was deeply interested in the relationship between imagination, assumption, consciousness, and the life a person eventually experiences. So tonight, I want you to look at wealth from a completely different angle, not as a number, not as a possession, not as a luxury car, a large house, or a bank balance. I want you to discover what it actually feels like when a person has internally crossed the line between I want to be rich and I am no longer living from the identity of someone who lacks. Because by the end of this lecture, you may recognize something surprising. The feeling you have been waiting to experience after becoming wealthy may actually be the feeling that teaches your mind how to become comfortable with wealth in the first place. And once you understand that, you stop chasing money in quite the same way. You begin changing the person who is expecting it. Think about how most people relate to money. They look at their current circumstances and allow those circumstances to tell them who they are. The bank account says, you are struggling. The bills say, you are behind. The salary says, this is all you can afford. Someone else's success says, they have what you do not. And slowly, without realizing it, a person begins to build an identity around those observations. They do not simply have less money. They begin to feel like a person for whom money is difficult. That distinction is enormous because there is a difference between experiencing a temporary financial circumstance and allowing that circumstance to become a definition of yourself. A person can have little money without mentally becoming a person of little possibility. But most people unconsciously merge the two. They look at what is happening and say, this is me. That is where the deeper problem begins, because the subconscious mind is constantly receiving instructions from the way you emotionally identify with your life. You may consciously say, I want wealth. But underneath that desire, there may be another conversation. I hope it happens. I need it to happen. I do not know when it will happen. What if it never happens? Other people seem to have it easier. I have tried before. I cannot afford that. Money disappears quickly. Rich people are different from me. Now notice something. The conscious desire is pointing toward abundance, but the emotional identity is pointing toward lack. And when those two directions conflict, people often become exhausted. They visualize wealth at night and worry about money during the day. They imagine freedom for 10 minutes and then spend 10 hours mentally rehearsing financial disaster. They say they trust the process, but every unexpected expense becomes evidence that nothing is working. They want to feel secure, but constantly check their circumstances to see whether they are secure yet. This is the hidden habit that keeps so many people trapped. They are trying to create a new life while emotionally remaining loyal to the old one. And this is why the idea of assumption is so powerful. An assumption is not merely a sentence you repeat. It is a position from which you experience yourself. It is the quiet answer to the question, who am I? If you assume yourself to be powerless, you interpret events through powerlessness. If you assume yourself to be unwanted, neutral events can begin to feel like rejection. If you assume yourself to be unsuccessful, opportunities can appear and still feel threatening. And if you assume yourself to be financially insecure, even a good financial month may feel temporary. You will always be waiting for the next problem. This is why wealth begins deeper than wealth. The first transformation is not necessarily in what you possess. It is in what you feel is normal for you. Think about a person who suddenly receives a large amount of money but has never developed an internal sense of security. They may feel excitement, but underneath the excitement is fear. What if I lose it? What if people find out? What if I make the wrong decision? What if this disappears? The money has changed. The identity has not. And because the identity has not changed, the person may unconsciously recreate the emotional environment they are familiar with. This is why becoming wealthy is not simply about getting more. It is about becoming comfortable with having more. And that comfort has a very different emotional texture from excitement. Excitement says, something amazing just happened. Security says, this is okay. Peace says, I do not need to panic. Confidence says, I can handle this. Abundance says, there is enough. That last feeling is particularly important because many people think rich people feel constantly excited about money. But real inner wealth often feels surprisingly ordinary. That may be one of the most important realizations you can take from this entire lecture. The person who is deeply secure does not need to stare at their security every 5 minutes. They simply live from it. You do not wake up every morning and celebrate the fact that you have a floor beneath your feet. You assume it. You walk across the room without wondering whether the floor will suddenly disappear. You do not constantly check whether gravity is still working. You simply move. That is what an assumption feels like when it becomes natural. It stops requiring effort. And this is where Neville's philosophy becomes psychologically fascinating. The imagination is not valuable merely because you can picture a beautiful future. Its deeper value is that imagination allows you to rehearse a new relationship with yourself before external evidence confirms it. You can begin becoming familiar with the emotional atmosphere of the life you desire, not by forcing yourself to feel ecstatic, not by pretending your problems do not exist, but by gently introducing your mind to a different normal. Imagine for a moment that money is no longer something you are desperately trying to obtain. Imagine that you already feel capable of handling it. Imagine paying a bill without fear. Imagine receiving money without immediately wondering whether it will disappear. Imagine looking at an opportunity and thinking, I can handle this. Imagine opening your banking app and feeling calm. Imagine making a decision without the constant pressure of scarcity. Notice how different that feels. There is no fireworks display. There is no dramatic emotional explosion. There is simply a quiet sense of room inside you. That room is important because scarcity makes the mind narrow. Abundance gives the mind space. When you are deeply afraid of not having enough, your attention becomes obsessed with survival. You cannot see possibilities clearly because your mind is scanning for danger. But when your inner state becomes calmer, you begin noticing options you previously overlooked. You communicate differently. You negotiate differently. You work differently. You make decisions differently. You recognize opportunities differently. You stop accepting certain situations simply because you are afraid of losing what little you have. This is where psychology and spiritual philosophy begin to overlap. Your inner state affects what you notice. What you notice affects what you choose. What you choose affects what you repeatedly do. And what you repeatedly do eventually changes your circumstances. So when you change your assumption, you are not necessarily waiting for magic to drop money from the sky. You are changing the person who moves through the world, and that person begins producing different consequences. Consider the seed. When you plant a seed beneath the soil, nothing appears to be happening. If you dug it up every morning to check whether it was growing, you would destroy the very process you were trying to witness. There is a lesson here. Many people do exactly this with their assumptions. They imagine prosperity, then they check their circumstances. Nothing looks different, so they become anxious. They imagine again, then they check again, still nothing. Then they panic. They search for another technique, another affirmation, another method, another sign. They keep digging up the seed. But the seed does not need your panic. It needs the right environment. Your inner identity is similar. You do not need to force it every minute. You need to stop contradicting it every minute. That is a much simpler idea. Instead of asking, how do I make myself believe I am rich? Ask, how would I think if financial security were becoming normal to me? There is a subtle difference. The first question creates pressure. The second creates curiosity. And curiosity allows the mind to explore. Suppose you are walking through a store and see something you genuinely want. The old identity immediately says, I cannot afford that. The new identity does not necessarily say, I am rich, so I must buy it. That would be performance. Instead, it might say, I can make a calm decision about this. That is wealth consciousness in a much more grounded form. You are no longer using money to determine your worth. You are no longer using the price tag to determine your emotional state. You can choose. You can wait. You can purchase. You can walk away. But the decision comes from calmness rather than panic. This is important because wealth is not simply the ability to buy things. It is the ability to experience choice. Scarcity says, I have no choice. Security says, I can decide. And sometimes the first sign that your inner relationship with wealth is changing is not that you suddenly have more money. It is that you stop feeling internally trapped. You begin to notice your thoughts. You begin catching yourself before the old story takes over. Someone mentions money. You do not immediately become tense. An unexpected expense appears. You handle it without mentally predicting catastrophe. Someone else succeeds. You do not automatically interpret their success as evidence of your failure. You hear a number that once intimidated you. Instead of thinking, people like me could never have that, you begin thinking, that level of possibility exists. That is a profound shift because your imagination is expanding before your circumstances necessarily do. And expansion always begins invisibly. A mountain does not become tall at the moment you notice it. A river does not begin flowing when you first see it. A garden does not become alive when the first flower opens. There was a hidden process before the visible result. Your identity works the same way. There is a period when you are becoming internally familiar with something before you have external confirmation. That period can feel uncomfortable because your old identity is still loud. The old self says, "Where is the evidence?" The new self says, "I know what direction I am moving." And that difference is where persistence becomes meaningful. Perspinance is not endlessly forcing yourself to believe something while secretly terrified that it will not happen. Persistence is returning to the identity you have chosen whenever the old identity tries to reclaim your attention. You may have a difficult afternoon. Return. You may receive disappointing news. Return. You may look at your finances and feel discouraged. Return. You may compare yourself with someone who appears far ahead. Return. Not with aggression, not with denial. Simply return. Like a compass. A compass does not become confused because you walked in the wrong direction for 10 minutes. It simply points again. You can do the same. Your attention can return to the person you are becoming. And this is where inner conversations become extremely powerful. Most people are having conversations all day long that nobody else can hear. You imagine what someone would say. You imagine what you would say back. You replay old conversations. You predict future conversations. You criticize yourself. You defend yourself. You explain yourself. You rehearse failure. You rehearse rejection. You rehearse embarrassment. And then you wonder why certain emotional patterns feel so familiar. You have been practicing them. So begin changing the private conversations, not with exaggerated statements that feel completely disconnected from your present experience. Use conversations that create dignity. Imagine someone you trust asking, "How are things going?" And hear yourself answering calmly, "Things are opening up for me." Or imagine saying, "I feel much more secure now." Or simply, "I know I can handle what comes next." Notice that none of these statements require you to pretend that you already possess everything. They change your relationship with the future. They teach your mind that the future is not a threat. That is powerful because some people are not actually afraid of becoming successful. They are afraid of what success would require them to become. More responsibility, more visibility, more expectations, more decisions, more attention, more people asking for something. So beneath the desire for wealth, there can sometimes be an unconscious fear of wealth. The person says, "I want millions," but emotionally they associate money with danger. They have seen people fight over money. They have heard stories about wealthy people being lonely. They may believe rich people are selfish. They may fear being judged. They may worry that success will change their relationships. The conscious mind says, "More." The subconscious says, "Careful." And the deeper work is not simply convincing yourself to want more. It is making prosperity emotionally safe. You can ask yourself quietly, if I were financially secure, what would become easier for me? perhaps rest, perhaps generosity, perhaps creativity, perhaps time with family, perhaps the freedom to leave an unhealthy environment, perhaps the ability to build something meaningful. When you connect wealth with what you genuinely value, money stops being the destination. It becomes a tool, and that changes your relationship with it. Think about a door. If you stand outside a door repeating, I wish I could enter, nothing changes simply because you repeat the sentence louder. At some point, you have to become the person who reaches for the handle. In the same way, you can spend years saying, I want financial freedom, while continuing to make every decision from the identity of someone who is powerless. The door is not merely outside you. The door is the identity you are willing to inhabit. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to make temporary reality your permanent psychological identity. There is a difference between acknowledging a fact and worshiping it. You can acknowledge your current income. You can acknowledge your expenses. You can acknowledge your responsibilities. But you don't have to turn those facts into prophecies. Your current circumstances describe where you are. They do not have to define where you are going. That distinction creates breathing room, and breathing room creates possibility. Now, there is something else that happens when your identity begins changing. You become less impressed by appearances. You see someone driving an expensive car, and you do not automatically feel inferior. You see someone living in a beautiful house, and you do not automatically conclude that life has passed you by. You see a successful business, and instead of thinking, why don't I have that? You begin thinking, if they can create that, possibility is larger than I thought. That is a completely different emotional response. Comparison turns another person's success into evidence against you. Expansion turns another person's success into evidence of possibility. One contracts you, the other enlarges you. And perhaps this is one of the clearest signs that your relationship with abundance is changing. You stop needing other people to lose in order for you to feel capable of winning. You stop thinking there is only one seat at the table. You stop treating money as a fixed amount that somebody else must possess instead of you. You begin seeing life as larger than the narrow story you inherited. This is why imagination matters so much. Imagination allows you to experience possibility before your habits have caught up with it. But there is a right way to use it. Do not make imagination another form of desperation. Do not sit for 20 minutes visualizing wealth while internally screaming, please happen. Instead, let your imagination become a place of familiarity. Close your eyes at night. Let the day become quiet. Then imagine one small moment that would feel natural if your financial life were secure. Perhaps you are sitting at your desk reviewing your finances. Perhaps you are paying a bill. Perhaps you are having coffee without worrying about tomorrow. Perhaps someone asks how your work is going, and you smile because you know you are building something substantial. Do not force the picture. Feel the normality. Let the emotional atmosphere be simple, safe, steady, certain. The purpose is not to create a fantasy you escape into. The purpose is to teach your nervous system a new possibility, because the mind becomes familiar with what it repeatedly experiences, even when that experience begins in imagination. And morning is equally important. Before you reach for your phone and absorb everyone else's urgency, Give yourself a few moments. Remember who you are choosing to be, not who you were yesterday, not what yesterday's mistake says about you, not what someone else expects. Who are you today? If financial security were becoming part of your identity, how would you carry yourself? Perhaps more patiently, perhaps more deliberately, perhaps with less need to prove yourself. Perhaps you would stop making impulsive decisions simply because you are afraid of missing out. Perhaps you would spend your attention on creating value rather than worrying about whether you are already successful enough. This is where self-concept becomes practical. Your self-concept is not merely an inspirational phrase. It influences what you tolerate. It influences what you pursue. It influences how you respond to setbacks. It influences what opportunities feel believable. It influences how you interpret silence. Imagine two people receive the same rejection. One thinks, of course, nothing works for me. The other thinks that was not the right door. Same event, different identity, different meaning, and meaning shapes behavior. The second person keeps moving. The first person withdraws. Over time, those small differences compound. This is why your inner world matters, not because you need to control every event. You cannot. Life will still contain uncertainty. People will still disappoint you. Plans will still change. There will still be storms. But the person who develops an inner sense of stability does not require perfect weather to remain oriented. The ocean is not calm because there are no waves. It is deep enough that the waves do not define its entire nature. You can become like that. You can allow emotions without becoming every emotion. Fear may appear. You do not have to build a home inside it. Doubt may appear. You do not have to make it your identity. Impatience may appear. You do not have to obey it. This is emotional regulation in its simplest form. You notice what is happening. You breathe. You allow the feeling to move. Then you choose again. That is strength, not the absence of emotion. The ability to remain yourself while emotion passes through you. And there is another quiet sign of growing wealth consciousness. You begin to think long term. Scarcity wants immediate proof. Security can wait. A person living from fear asks, what can I get right now? A person living from stability asks, what am I building? That question changes everything. A seed does not become a tree because you demand fruit from it every morning. You nurture it, you protect it, you give it time, you let roots form. In the same way, some of the most important changes in your life may initially look unimpressive. You saved a little money. You learned a skill. You improved your discipline. You stopped wasting your attention. You started speaking differently about yourself. You became more patient. You stopped chasing every opportunity. You began choosing opportunities more carefully. None of these moments may look like wealth, but they are the architecture of wealth. And architecture comes before decoration. This is why you should not underestimate small internal shifts. The person who begins feeling secure before becoming wealthy is practicing something important. They are learning how to live without constantly demanding proof. They are learning how to make decisions from possibility rather than panic. They are learning how to receive without immediately fearing loss. They are learning how to give without feeling depleted. They are learning how to rest without guilt. They are learning how to say no. They are learning how to say yes. They are becoming spacious. And perhaps that is the real feeling of wealth, not excess. Space. Space in the mind, space in time, space in decisions, space in relationships, space to create, space to breathe, space to imagine something larger. So if you are currently in a season where your outer circumstances do not resemble your desired life, do not make the mistake of assuming that nothing is changing. Look deeper. Ask yourself what has already changed inside you. Are you thinking differently? Are you less reactive? Are you beginning to expect better? Are you becoming less ashamed of wanting more? Are you becoming more comfortable receiving? Are you beginning to see yourself as capable? These may seem like small things. They are not. A river begins with movement you can barely see. A mountain is formed through changes too slow for the human eye to appreciate. A garden grows while you are asleep. And your identity can change in the same quiet way. One thought, one assumption, one inner conversation, one decision, one return, again and again, until the person who once felt like an outsider to the life they desired begins to feel at home inside it. That is the real transformation. You are not trying to become someone completely different. You are allowing a different version of yourself to become familiar. And perhaps that is why the feeling rich people experience before they are rich is not always excitement. Sometimes it is relief. Sometimes it is peace. Sometimes it is a quiet certainty that says, I do not need to figure everything out today. Sometimes it is the feeling of no longer begging life for permission. Sometimes it is simply knowing that your future is not required to look like your past. And that realization can change a person. Because once you stop assuming that tomorrow must repeat yesterday, your imagination becomes free. You can build another expectation, another identity, another emotional home. And from that home, you begin living differently. You walk differently. You speak differently. You decide differently. You work differently. You recover differently. You respond differently. The world may not immediately notice, but eventually, the world has a way of reflecting what you repeatedly embody. A mirror does not create your face. It reflects it. In the same way, your circumstances often reveal patterns that have been repeated internally and behaviorally for a long time. Charm the pattern, and the reflection eventually has to change. Not instantly, not always in the way you expect, but change begins somewhere, and it often begins where nobody else can see it, inside. So tonight, before you sleep, do not ask yourself, where is my money? Ask something deeper. What kind of person would I be if I knew I was financially secure? How would that person think about tomorrow? How would that person handle today's problem? How would that person speak about themselves? How would that person respond when something goes wrong? How would they treat money? How would they treat their time? How would they treat their own attention? Then, for a few quiet moments, become familiar with that person. You do not need to pretend. You do not need to force emotion. You do not need to convince yourself of something your mind is not ready to accept. Just visit the possibility. Feel what it would be like for security to become normal. Feel what it would be like to stop chasing. Feel what it would be like to trust yourself. And when you wake tomorrow, carry a little of that feeling with you, not as a performance, as a direction. Because the goal is not to walk around pretending to be rich. The goal is to stop thinking like someone who is permanently excluded from abundance. There is a profound difference. One is costume, the other is identity. And identity is where lasting change begins. Perhaps you have spent years looking at wealth as something that happens outside you. A number appears, an opportunity arrives. A person gives you money, a business succeeds, a promotion comes. And yes, these external events matter, but there is another level of wealth that begins before all of them. It is the moment you stop seeing yourself as someone who must remain trapped. It is the moment you begin allowing yourself to expect possibility. It is the moment you become comfortable with the idea that your life can expand. It is the moment you no longer feel guilty for wanting more. It is the moment another person's success stops threatening your own future. It is the moment you stop needing immediate evidence before you allow yourself to feel hopeful. That is a powerful place to stand. And from there, you may discover something almost paradoxical. The less desperately you chase wealth, the more clearly you can build it. Because desperation consumes attention. Peace gives attention back to you. Fear makes you reactive. Security makes you deliberate. Scarcity makes you think about what you lack. Abundance makes you notice what you can create. And creation is where your power becomes practical. So perhaps the richest thing you can practice today is not having more. It is feeling that you are enough while becoming more. That is different. You do not have to hate your present self to create your future self. You do not have to be ashamed of where you are. You do not have to insult your current circumstances in order to believe in something better. You can stand exactly where you are and still choose another direction. A sculptor does not hate the block of stone. They simply see what it can become. You can look at your life in the same way, not as a finished object, as material, as possibility, as something still being shaped. And maybe this is the quiet secret nobody tells you. Before the bank account changes, the conversation in your head may change. Before the opportunity arrives, your sense of what is possible may expand. Before you receive more, you may become more comfortable receiving. Before you live with financial freedom, you may begin practicing emotional freedom. And before the world calls you successful, you may privately stop calling yourself a failure. That moment matters because when your inner identity changes, you no longer approach life asking, how can I prove that I deserve this? You begin asking, what can I build from here? That is a completely different life. So do not obsess over whether the seed has broken through the soil. Do not keep digging. Do not measure your entire future by today's weather. Do not let one difficult chapter become the title of your story. Return to the identity. Return to the assumption. Return to the feeling of quiet possibility. And then live. Work, learn, dot create, says he, be, connect, ret, take opportunity, make wise decisions, lummed your inner world and outer actions to cooperate, because imagination without action can become escape. Action without imagination can become exhaustion. But when the inner identity and outer behavior begin moving in the same direction, something powerful happens. You stop fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, you have enormous energy available for creation. Maybe you are closer than you think, not necessarily to a specific amount of money, but to a different relationship with yourself. And that may be the first wealth worth discovering, the wealth of not panicking, the wealth of trusting yourself, the wealth of having room in your mind, the wealth of being able to imagine tomorrow without fearing it, the wealth of knowing that another person's success does not diminish you, the wealth of being able to receive, the wealth of being able to give, the wealth of choosing, the wealth of becoming, because money can buy comfort, but identity determines whether you can live comfortably with what you have. Money can create options, but consciousness determines whether you recognize them. Money can change your circumstances, but your relationship with yourself determines what those circumstances mean. So perhaps the feeling you are searching for is not, I have finally become rich. Perhaps it is something quieter. I am safe enough to think bigger. I am worthy enough to receive. I am capable enough to build. I am patient enough to allow. I am wise enough to choose. And finally, I no longer need my past to predict my future. Let that thought settle. You do not need to force it. You do not need to shout it. Just let it become familiar. Because a new life rarely begins with a loud announcement. Sometimes it begins with one quiet thought that you finally stop arguing with. And then, little by little, the thought becomes an assumption. The assumption becomes an identity. The identity changes your choices. The choices change your actions. The actions change your circumstances. And one day you look around and realize that the life you once imagined from a distance has become the life you are now living from within. The world may call that success. But you will know it began much earlier. It began the day you stopped waiting to feel wealthy until you had wealth and started becoming inwardly at home with the person who could receive it. That is where the journey begins. And sometimes the first sign that your future is changing is not that you can see the destination. It is that you finally feel at peace walking toward it